Well, as you can imagine, I am very upset today, and you probably are too. Before we do that, let me just mention where I'm located. I did travel today, and I am in South Korea. And you know what I used to think? I used to think that, in fact, I think I actually posted this on Facebook once years ago. No matter how bad things get, you don't live in a North Korean prison camp like about 1 million people do, right? Isn't that like 1 million people he has in prison just north of me now? And let me tell you, it was snowing here today. It is cold. And can you imagine the conditions in those prison camps that the Kim family has run for many years? It's just awful. So we always got to ask ourselves compared to what? But these LA fires are just beyond tragic. And maybe the most tragic thing about them is that they could have been prevented or they could have been mitigated at the very least, easily, for sure. So I'm sure many people listening and watching have been affected by it. I am so sorry that you are having to go through this. It is a level of devastation that is truly shocking. And let's not forget what the people in North Carolina and some of the other areas suffered as well. You know, that one tends to get swept away. Of course, LA has Hollywood and lots of famous, wealthy people, so it'll get more attention, but it is tragic nonetheless. It's just unbelievable. As most of you know, I grew up in Los Angeles, so when I'm watching this stuff on TV and I'm hearing the stories and, occasionally they'll show a street sign, I'm watching it maybe on a YouTube video, and I'm thinking, I know exactly where that is. I went to that place that's no longer there. And the conspiracy theories are flying, and I'll tell you, a lot of them are true. If you don't believe in a conspiracy theory, you need to really reconsider that, because a conspiracy is nothing more than two or more people having a discussion, not including others, and making plans. That's all a conspiracy is. And as I've always said, the United States was a conspiracy against the British Crown. Okay? There's lots of conspiracies. They're going on all the time. They're all around us. Will BlackRock be looking to buy up all this vacant land in Los Angeles over the next several years? Will the incredibly tyrannical Coastal Commission that decides whether or not you can build anything along the coastline or quite a bit inland, actually, of the coastline, allow people to rebuild these houses? They're never going to allow these houses to be rebuilt. There's just no way. I mean, some of them will be rebuilt, of course. And there's already been some talk that they're going to ease up on the permitting process and so forth. But let me tell you, there's no way it will ever go back to the way it was. There is definitely an agenda for the 15-minute cities, for the 2030 stuff. You've all probably heard about it, and it is true. And now the incompetent and truly evil idiots that have been in power in California for far too long are sadly going to get to make their agenda a reality in some ways. But let's talk about the insurance thing for a minute. There's been a lot of talk about the insurance companies that canceled all of these policies. Well, that's not exactly true, because a lot of the policies that people say were canceled were actually just not renewed. They were non-renewals. There is a difference. And why did they non-renew the policies? Well, one of the big reasons, of course, is the stupid state of California with their idiotic communist moron governor, Gavin Newscum, as people like to call him, who really should probably be prosecuted. I mean, is there really any question? A lot of politicians should be prosecuted. But the government in California, in its infinite stupidity, wouldn't let insurance companies raise rates to where they needed to raise them. And of course, just like in Zimbabwe, when inflation was out of control. And so the government of Zimbabwe finally said, well, we got to put a stop to this. So what are we going to do? Well, we're simply going to tell the merchants that if they're selling anything, because prices were literally going up by the hour in Zimbabwe, if they're selling anything, they can no longer raise prices unless we give them consent to raise the prices. So of course, naturally, price controls always create shortages. Communism, socialism, price controls always create shortages. So the insurance company just said, okay, we can't afford to do business here. We can't insure the risk. So we're going to have to just back out. We're just going to go away. So they did. And they didn't renew the policies. So a lot of people really, really got hurt by that. But I will tell you, for many others who were insured, cheer up a little bit because a lot of times, and I've seen it over and over again, I saw it with Katrina especially. That's where I really realized it when Katrina happened. And so many people I knew were affected by Katrina, and they actually ended up making money on that whole thing. And I've explained it before on the show many times over many years, over the last 21 years. But I'll just explain that concept again for a moment. I'm not suggesting anybody commit insurance fraud or anything like that, right? Of course, you need to negotiate with your insurance company. You may have to litigate with your insurance company. Insurance bad faith is a common thing, and the legal books have ample volumes on it. But what happens a lot of times is you get your insurance payout from the fire, and then some developer comes along, and there's that principle of what's called highest and best use. Okay. Something I've talked about many times over the years. It's an appraisal principle of highest and best use for that land. So a developer comes along. Now, it might be BlackRock, okay? Who knows? It might be evil globalist for sure. But a developer comes along and says, hey, I got a higher and better use for that land than you rebuilding your house on it. So I'm going to pay you way more than it's worth. And you already got a payout from your insurance company. So between that and the developer with the highest and best use agenda, you could actually make quite a bit of money. And I guarantee you, a year from now, 2 years from now, 3 years from now, this is going to take a very, very long time to rebuild Los Angeles. You're going to hear many stories about people who made out like bandits, who were really depressed, who are incredibly sad about their losses, and they are very sad, no question about it. I remember in the 90s when I had just moved into a new house in Turtle Rock in Irvine, California, and we had these giant fires, and I had to evacuate. And there was a very big likelihood it was a mandatory evacuation. Some people didn't listen to it, but I did evacuate. I remember some friends pulled up in their minivans and said, put your stuff in our minivan. And they took my stuff off. And I went to my mom's house and slept over there. And I came back the next morning because the fire went a different direction. It was like being on another planet. The sidewalks, everything was just covered in soot. It was unbelievable, just covered in soot. The sky looked totally eerie. You've seen those pictures of LA. Yeah, it's obviously very sad. But look, I talk about money, I talk about finances, I talk about investing. That's what I do. So I'm going to tell you, this may work out a lot better than you think it's going to work out. So cheer up. Obviously, many of you, if you're not affected by it directly, you know people that are affected. Tell them that. Tell them that a lot of times they actually end up making money. And a lot of times they get to do a life change that maybe was in the offing anyway. It was time to do something else, to move somewhere else. I mean, look, I've been telling people for years to leave the Socialist Republic of California. Maybe this is your great opportunity to do that and start a new life somewhere else with a big fat insurance settlement and a big fat check for a piece of land that has now been cleared by the fire, sadly. Now, from another perspective on the financial side of things, if you're a real estate investor, and you probably are because you're listening to this show, if you are thinking, what is this going to do to the economy? What is this going to do to the housing market? Well, this is going to be upward pressure for housing everywhere in the world to a smaller extent, but certainly everywhere in the US. And just think about it. I know there are these idiots out there who say, well, Jason is always rosy and positive about real estate investing. Listen, don't take my word for it. Just think critically, critical thinking, right? Which is something that it's all too rare nowadays. I mean, not with listeners to this show, but just think about it. Think about the massive construction effort. This is like rebuilding the country This is like the baby boom post World War II. I mean, rebuilding one of the biggest cities in America, one of the largest economies in the country. Of course, the economy is going to take a huge hit in LA. There's no question about it. But it's also going to boom at the same time. And we've got a new president coming in who wants to slap tariffs on all sorts of imports that are, a lot of them are construction materials, okay? Door handles, hinges, cabinets, drywall, lumber, everything. Okay? Slapping tariffs on that and then deporting a lot of the labor to rebuild the city, right? A lot of that labor lives in LA. Certainly, LA has a giant Mexican population. Okay? It did when I was growing up. And hey, that was a long time ago. Some of you, I know you're thinking I'm still haven't grown up. That could be true sometimes. So you think about the massive new amount of demand for construction materials, all those ingredients to rebuild all of those houses and all the new apartment buildings that'll go up and all the new commercial properties that'll be rebuilt, all the new houses that'll be rebuilt. The massive demand for construction materials is nothing short of staggering. Same thing with North Carolina. Same thing. But LA probably more so because all those properties are much more fancy. They're much more expensive. They're much more high end. It's just going to be a massive demand for labor, for construction materials. And that impacts every house in the country, every construction project in the country. Can you imagine? Just think about this. Think about all of these different contractors that do every contracting service under the sun, whether it be debris removal, lot cleanup, lot clearing, grading, drywall, framing, installing cabinets, installing everything. All of those people all around the country right now are watching these horrific fires and they're thinking, I got to move to Los Angeles. I got to move there because there is so much money to be made there. There is going to be so much demand for my labor, for my services. I got to just move to LA right now. Go where the business is. They're going to go there. And what's that going to do in Texas and Georgia and Tennessee and Alabama and Florida? That's going to reduce the amount of labor available in those markets. And all of the materials suppliers are saying the same thing. Oh, I supply lumber, I supply drywall, I supply concrete, I supply whatever. I supply wiring, I do electrical, and I do electrical supplies. Ship it to Los Angeles. What do you think that's going to do to the cost of those products for D.R. Horton and Pulte Homes and Lennar Homes and Toll Brothers and every other home builder under the sun and every remodeler and every fix and flipper in Utah, in Georgia, in Illinois? It is going to make their supplies scarce. Their supply of labor and their supply of materials just became far more scarce. What does that do to prices? It's simple supply and demand. All of the properties you now own and that you might buy soon, sooner is better than later, are going to have a lot of upward pricing pressure because of all the things I just described. Don't take my word for it. Just think it through. It's just logic. It's just supply and demand, the most fundamental rule of economics. That is what is going to happen. Nothing else can happen. I mean, I don't know. Can something else happen? If you're watching this on a video platform, you can comment below. If you're listening on the podcast, go to jasonhartman.com/ask and tell me what you think. That's not just for asking a question, it's for expressing your opinion and your views on it. Okay, I want to play some video clips for you. So here is the first one. This is from a KFI, that's a talk radio station guy that I used to listen to many years ago. And it's John Cobelt, who was on the show with John and Ken. I don't even know if they're still on the air anymore. I haven't lived in Southern California for 14 years now. Okay, so this is a short clip from PragerU. Let's just listen to this because he just lays out the case for why it happened. I remember years ago when I first really understood this, it was maybe, oh gosh, how long ago was that? That was 2005-ish, give or take. It was after the big Arrowhead fires, Arrowhead, California, Big Bear, Arrowhead area. I had a motorhome at the time. I took my motorhome and my girlfriend Monique, and we went to Arrowhead for the weekend in the motorhome. And it was right after these massive, massive fires. And I remember one of the rangers we talked to explaining the problem. It was because they didn't clear the underbrush because it was bad for the habitat of, the bugs and they didn't do that. So that's what gave all the fuel to this fire. And universally, all the rangers that we talk to, they're all pretty like granola environmentalist type people, rangers are, right? They just said that's what happened. If they had cleared that brush, there wouldn't have been very much fuel for the fire. But that brush was dry underneath the trees, right? The trees, they don't burn as easily because they're alive. They're filled with water. Okay, that's what gives them their turgidity, is all that water in their cells. But that dry brush, the state of California said, leave it there, leave it alone. You're going to hear some of that on this video.
California, the Golden State, home to Hollywood, Silicon Valley, Napa Valley, glitz, glamour, and now blackouts. In 2019, California became the first state ever to intentionally deny electricity to its own citizens. No power for your home, your Tesla, your cell phone, or maybe your oxygen tank. This is California we're talking about, not some impoverished third world country. California. If it were a sovereign nation, it would be the 5th largest economy in the world, ahead of the UK and France. But in the hot, dry months of late summer and early fall, it can no longer provide electricity to its own citizens. It has to shut down its aging power lines or risk starting another catastrophic fire. In 2018, the town of Paradise burned to the ground. Over 10,000.
Oh, and by the way, a moment ago when I was talking about the rebuilding effort, I mean, think of just the rebuilding effort, the scale of the rebuilding effort of the infrastructure. Now, at least all these lines are going to get underground now, so they're going to be a lot safer, right? But can you imagine the massive cost and the massive amount of materials it takes just to rebuild that power infrastructure? That's just one part of the infrastructure that will have to be rebuilt in California, in, well, LA area.
Homes were destroyed. 85 people died. In 2017, the Redwood fire killed 9 people. California has always had wildfires, but now the fire threat is worse than ever.
Oh, and by the way, I don't think in this case in LA we should call them wildfires. We should call them what they are. They are an attack on the people that live there. And why do I say attack? Well, I could go to all the conspiracy theories, or I could just talk about the homeless guy doing a crack pipe in the woods, or the government being complicit in letting it happen. Did they let it happen because it's some big conspiracy theory? Or just because of incompetence or budget cuts? And you've all heard about the fire department budget cut. By the way, I looked that up because as a critical thinker, everybody's saying, well, they cut the fire department budget by, $20 million, give or take. That was about the amount, right? And I thought, well, you know what they're never telling us? What is the budget of the fire department? So I looked up the budget of the LA Fire Department over the last 5 years, and I got it year by year, and it was give or take about $700 million. So now I know the answer compared to what? I mean, think about it. If the budget for the fire department, which, I had no idea without looking it up, if the budget for the fire department was $100 million a year, cutting it by 20 million is 20%. That's a big cut, right? If it's $100 billion a year, which I don't really know what the numbers are, you probably don't either, then $20 million is a drop in the bucket. It's pocket change, right? So I had to look it up so I'd know the answer compared to what life's most important questions. The answer is 700 million, give or take. I mean, it's been higher, it's been lower, but that's a good basic number. And guess what? How many firefighters does LA have? About 3,500. And then it has administrative staff. I always wanted to know what's the administrative staff. By the way, the budget, of course, got higher over the years. 22 to 2023, $837 million budget. So they cut about 17 million out of that. And then the firefighters had a strike and they got some pay increases and it went up to 895 million for next year, well, this year that we're in, but they haven't spent it all yet, obviously. But how many employees? Yeah, there are 3,246 firefighters. Well, technically, no, not just firefighters. Firefighters, paramedics, engineers, and other operational roles, whatever that means, and about 353 administrative staff. So there you go. There's your LA Fire Department.
Why? For the answer, we should look to one of the state's leading citizens, Leonardo DiCaprio. The reason these wildfires have worsened is because of climate.
Of course, he's joking about that. Leonardo DiCaprio, the hypocrite, the guy that keeps promoting climate change is such a big problem in his 412-foot yacht, his mega super yacht, and of course, his private jets and all the rest.
Climate change. Case closed? Well, not quite. But Leo isn't wrong. Climate change has made the problem worse. He's just not right in the way he thinks he is. Let's get into it. Long before global warming became climate change, Californians had to deal with fires. The hot, bone-dry summer and fall winds, thick forests, and dense brush that cover good portions of the state made sure of that. As the state's population grew, the citizens, always aware of fire risk, took steps to mitigate that risk, sometimes intentionally, sometimes not. First, there were large-scale logging operations. These helped thin the forest. Then there were controlled burns, fires purposely set to clear areas of brush in fire.
And I remember when I was a kid in Los Angeles, seeing controlled burns taking place all the time. You know, I remember we'd be going up or down the 405 freeway, the San Diego freeway, and you'd see, this brush being burnt, and the firemen were there, and so I said firemen because, well, they probably should be men. They're just stronger, okay? That's another thing. This DEI bullshit, it has got to end. It's so pathetic. People need to be hired based on merit. That's it. Period. End of discussion. Okay? If I'm trapped in a burning house, give me a big, strong fireman to come and rescue me. Okay? I don't want a 5'2" woman who, got admitted because of DEI. Okay? Yeah, women can do whatever they want, except when my life depends on it. Here's an idea. What if people die because of DEI programs, and the people that promote the DEI programs and participate in them and cause deaths, how about if we prosecute those people? I think that's a pretty good idea. I think they should be prosecuted because, of course, if it's a causal thing, if they actually cause the death of people, they should be prosecuted. If they cause the destruction of property because of their stupid DEI program, they should be prosecuted. They should be held accountable. They should be liable for it. I mean, if you crash into someone's car, you're going to be liable for that. Why wouldn't they be liable for that? Something to think about.
Zones, which were then quickly extinguished. As the influence of the environmental movement grew more pronounced at the end of the last century and into this one, the state's policy changed. First, new regulations sharply curtailed logging operations.
So if the Sierra Club, or for example, I don't know, who was in on it, but whatever environmental group pushed the curtailing of the logging operations, leaving all this extra fuel for the fire, literally. I mean, I know that's a saying. Shouldn't they be liable for that? I mean, if you built an unsafe car or an unsafe road, or you had a house with nails sticking up out of the floor and people stepped on them and the nail went through their foot, you'd be liable for that. Why shouldn't the environmentalists that caused this problem be liable, both civilly and criminally, for doing this? They burnt a city down.
Cutting down trees for lumber was depicted as almost an act of cruelty.
They've killed, what, 24 people so far? That's what we know of. That death count's going to get much higher. And think of the lingering effects, the toxic air quality, the cancers, the respiratory problems that'll come from that as people are inhaling this smoke in Los Angeles.
Even clearing dead trees was frowned upon. Controlled burns were viewed the same way. It was much better, the environmentalists contended, to let nature do its thing. And as housing became more expensive in the big cities, developers started to build homes further from metropolitan areas and closer to the wilderness. Parallel.
And why did housing become so expensive in the big cities? Well, the government, once again, controlling with ridiculous building requirements and huge fees. And I mean, it's just so, look, if you haven't ever built anything, you just won't understand how bad it is. It's just unbelievable. I mean, I've remodeled 7 offices for my companies over the years. They were all in Orange County, California. And I just remember the ridiculousness, the waste that these silly laws would cause. I've explained them on prior shows. I won't go into it today.
To this was the state's green energy mandate. Governor Jerry Brown declared that California would be powered entirely by renewable energy, mostly wind and solar, by 2045. Tremendous pressure was put on Pacific Gas and Electric, the state's largest energy company, to get started on this project. Here's where Leo gets it right, if unintentionally. The green energy mandate turned the power company's attention and resources away from the power grid and to wind and solar. How did this lead to new and deadlier fires? Let's put the pieces of the puzzle together. Wildfires can be started in all sorts of ways. Lightning strikes, campfires not properly put out, a cigarette carelessly tossed away, or sometimes straight up arson.
But he forgot about the homeless guy with the crack pipe.
But the worst culprit of all is power lines. In 2018, fully half of California's wildfires were started by power lines or related electrical problems. It's not hard to figure out why. California's power grid is ancient. Most of its towers were built before 1950. Some of the lines are so old they qualify for the National Registry of Historic Places.
And some of them were built around 1920. They're even older than he mentioned.
Lines that are failing and sparking fires? No surprise, the old ones. The deadliest fire in California history, the 2018 Camp Fire that burned down Paradise, was caused by equipment that dates back to 1921. 100-year-old equipment. It's not that the power company didn't know there was a problem. They knew, but they were focused on more pressing political priorities, like green energy. That's where PG&E, a public utility, which just means it's the politicians who call the shots, put its money and resources. In 2018, PG&E spent $2.4 billion on renewables. By comparison, in 2017, it spent $1.4 billion on existing infrastructure.
So all these environmental green weenies, I mean, can you imagine the environmental impact of these fires and the rebuilding after the fires? It's like the stupid Cash for Clunkers program that Obama did years ago. I talked about that on prior shows. You know, it's like, oh, let's just go destroy all of this useful stuff and let's replace it with new stuff that we had to build and manufacture and pollute the environment. You know, that's the same thing that's happening here.
So let's review. The forests grow ever more dense. Brush builds up because controlled burns are not permitted. Developers build in wilderness areas. And the dominant power company chases its renewable energy mandate at the expense of nuts and bolts line maintenance. Such are the things uncontrollable fires are made of. Where are we now? PG&E is in bankruptcy, sued into oblivion, with no viable plan to fix the grid. Instead of bringing vital infrastructure into the 21st century, California is voluntarily turning itself into a third world country. That's what happens when progressives and environmentalists run things. The Golden State isn't going green, it's going broke, and it's going dark. When that happens, maybe a light bulb will finally turn on in the heads of California voters. I'm John Cobelt for Prager University.
Highly recommend you subscribe to the PragerU YouTube channel. They've got some good content there. You know, it should be pretty clear by now. The action step not necessarily for those that are affected by the fire, okay? But the action step for everybody else is the usual action step. Go out and buy some more properties because of all the stuff we just talked about before we looked at that video. The cost of construction is going to skyrocket. The cost of materials is going to skyrocket. The cost of labor is going to skyrocket. And that makes all the houses you own right now more valuable, and all the houses you buy, it's going to put upward price pressure on them. So income property is the right asset to have at this time. Also, this is another reason to diversify. One of my 10 commandments, okay, major thing is thou shalt diversify. This is the reason to be in more than one market, be in at least 3 markets, not more than 5, so that you are diversified. Now, you're unlikely to be in a market like this that's going to have any big problem, but you never know. Anyway, let's take a look at this video because it really underscores the compounding effect. And I love Sky News. They've got some good stuff. Subscribe to their channel for sure.
But first, the fires in California rage on, and so does the controversy around them. As of now, we know that at least 7 people are dead and thousands of structures are damaged or destroyed, more than 9,000 in the Palisades and Eden fires alone. And we also know, sadly, that those numbers are all but surely expected to increase. And again, though, even as we tally all of the damage up, we have to ask the question, how did this happen? I mean, we know fires are a thing in Los Angeles, just as they are in Australia, and that the Santa Ana winds which drive them are a phenomenon. So how was the city so unprepared? Now, last night I gave you a rundown of all the different ways in which the disaster still unfolding in California was made worse, much worse, by the corrupting influences of environmental lunacy, Democrat corruption, and the DEI cult. Well, as they say in the TV commercials, but wait, there's more, because I want to start this off by saying, of course, that the actual firefighters and emergency teams on the ground are doing incredible jobs. Just look at this amazing water drop by a helicopter right along the fire front. That's daring, and that's skill, and that's heroism. But these heroes, and indeed all of California, have been let down by their bosses, the elected officials and bureaucrats who have made their jobs so much harder and their state that much more dangerous. I want to play something for you here that is, to me, absolutely unbelievable, and yet it's true, because for years and years and years, when there have been fights about diversity in outfits like fire departments, the argument has always been, well, I don't really care who pulls me out of a fire, so long as they are strong enough to do so.
This is so unbelievable. I mean, I always say, well, I haven't said it as much lately. During COVID, I kind of stopped saying it. It's an amazing time to be alive. This time that we are living in, with the technology, the things that just amaze us, it should be the most amazing, incredible time. And yet we have got none other than the politicians. They're the ones that are just screwing it up over and over and over again. The politicians and their pandering to these woke wackos. I mean, it's just psychotic. The fact that we could have a country where reason and critical thinking is just vilified constantly, and idiots like AOC get such a big voice. I mean, listen, I'm all for having people like AOC around, okay? It's a free country, okay? I'm all for people being able to express their opinions. Oh, and sometime we got to talk about Mark Zuckerberg. What a liar and criminal he is, but that's another discussion. But the fact that half of the country gives people like that so much credibility is just shocking. I mean, she's an idiot, plain and simple. She's just an idiot. I mean, she was a bartender, okay? Like, shouldn't the people in our elected office be people that have achieved things and people that have done things, that have overcome odds, that have proven themselves. It's unbelievable.
So how on earth could anyone argue against that, right? Well, meet Los Angeles Fire Department Deputy Chief Christine Larson. Here she is explaining why, if you think firefighting is just about being the strongest and most capable, you are very, very wrong.
Unbelievable.
You want to see somebody that responds to your house, your emergency, whether it's a medical call or a fire call, that looks like you. It gives that person a little bit more ease, knowing that somebody might understand their situation better. Is she strong enough to do this? Or you couldn't carry my husband out of a fire, which my response is, he got himself in the wrong place if I have to carry him out of a fire.
Can you believe
Did you get that? Yeah, that's right. She says that if you get caught in a fire, maybe you better check your privilege and realize why it's your own damn fault. Honestly, this here, what you saw right there, that is DEI in a nutshell. Because if you're white, well, you probably don't deserve saving anyway. If Christine Larson or her ilk are too out of shape to save you, well, that's your own damn problem. You shouldn't have been in the fire in the first place, they say. But, as she said at the start of the video, well, if you're a person of color, well, yeah, then we'll save you, and we'll make sure that the person who comes to the rescue ticks all the right diversity boxes. And this is before we get into every other policy fail that has made these fires so much worse. Last night we went over the water diversion policies and dam removal programs, which may very well have contributed to the lack of water available to fight the fires, and how the mayor of LA, Karen Bass, was off in Ghana when the fires broke out. And we spoke to a local who explained how, in the name of social justice, that is, fighting high premiums, California drove out insurance companies, meaning many, many, many homeowners will be left penniless. All of this, by the way, is why I've always said that what are sometimes derisively called the culture wars really do matter in a real practical sense, because that's what we're seeing here in California. Hard left, radical progressive insanity never just stays quarantined, behind the university gates. It infects and poisons everything it touches, turning the once great and productive state of California into a third world dump, where one of the city's deputy mayors a few weeks ago had his home raided by the FBI on suspicion of making bomb threats. What's going on in this place? At the same time, citizens have been left to fend essentially for themselves. The latest threat now with the fires is apparently looters. To put it another way, about the culture wars, well, you may not be interested in the culture wars, but as these progressive policies rolling out in California show you, the culture wars certainly are interested in you.
He nailed it. That's exactly right. So check that out on YouTube. Subscribe to their channel, Sky News. There's a lot going on in the world, folks. I'm sure you're busy, so I'll end it there today. Just think critically about what this will do to real estate. It is going to make it even more expensive. Look, I'm not saying there aren't cross currents, there aren't other issues. Of course there are. There are interest rates, there's salaries, there's affordability, there's incomes, there's everything, right? I'm just talking about this segment of the market equation. There's no question that there will be even more severe labor shortages of contractors and construction workers. There is no question that there will be even shorter supply of every construction material, and that all means there is no question that all those things will get more expensive. There you go. With that, we'll say over and out. I'll see you in a couple of days. Until then, happy investing and stay empowered.